I'm Ian McLean with Bush Agribusiness and one of the authors of the Australian Beef Report 2020. Enjoy working with producers across Northern Australia. We work with individual businesses, producer groups and companies across Northern Australia, analysing their businesses and doing training and group work and consulting, and quite enjoy that. Learn a lot from the people we work with, and pretty optimistic about the future of the pastoral industry. We think there's a need for an independent assessment and publication on the performance of the Australian beef industry. When we wrote the Northern Beef Report in 2013, I think it was, that was quite well received with a lot of the findings in that analysis we did. From that, we decided to extend it to all of Australia with an independent publication with the Australian Beef Report in 2017, which we're very pleased with the feedback that we got on that. And since it's been 3 years since that publication, we think it's time to update that with updated information and new insights for the industry. Profit-focused beef producers, and by profit-focused we don't just mean those that are money-hungry producers. Generally the people we deal with, what motivates them is being able to grow the business, fund their retirement succession, hand on to their children, and that requires them to have profitable businesses. So those that want to understand and grow their business. Another important market for this is industry advisors and stakeholders that want to have a good understanding of industry performance and what's driving it. The major differences are the inclusion of the pastoral panel chapter, which we're quite excited about, as well as the natural resource base chapter in there. There's updated financial and production information on the whole of the industry up until 2009, and there's some interesting results coming out of that as well. We also look into some other things which we did in the last one, such as the similarities between rural land and gold, look at rebuilding the herd after the drought, beef prices and climate risk management. Quite a bit. We enjoy getting in and having a look at the industry performance and what's going on, what's driving it, the factors separating the top performers. In terms of what we learned from this one, the cost price squeeze that's been an enduring feature in agriculture for a long time appears to be reversing. We discussed that in the report. It's not really a learning, but it just cemented to me the importance of intellectual capital within the industry, and that there's a lot of good experience and good operators out there that we can all learn a lot from. The impact of scale on industry performance. It's a massive issue for the industry that we think needs discussing a bit more. Smaller businesses can still be good businesses, and we address that in the report, but there's a major structural issue. Despite this, and the issue of scale and poor profitability across the industry, most of the beef is produced by profitable producers, and most of the land is managed by profitable producers, and we think they're key findings. The impact of price on the performance over time, year to year, is quite stark in these data, and we look at that a bit, but despite that, price isn't a profit driver in that it's not something that individual producers can focus on. So there's a bit of a discussion there on that, which sounds counterintuitive, but we discussed that in there. And just the regional differences. It's very interesting looking at the differences between regions within the north and the south, between the north and the south, particularly the trade-off between productivity and scale. The further north we go, there's lots of scale, costs come down, there's less productivity. And then in the south, there's lots of productivity and lots of income, but high costs due to lack of scale. So that contrast across the regions that produce beef in Australia, I think is quite interesting. The pastoral panel is an attempt by us to capture some of the experiential knowledge of producers. It's inspired a bit by a tribe of mentors. We're trying to do a tribe of mentors for the pastoral industry. It came about from me talking to a producer who's featured in the pastoral panel, and he was saying we need to try and capture the knowledge and experience that's out there, because there's a lot that's been pretty hard won and we need to make sure that's passed on. So that inspired us to look at putting the pastoral panel together. We came up with a list of 5 questions which we think gave us a good understanding of how people think, how they approach management and how they approach problems. And we went out to some of the people in the industry that we've got a lot of respect for, that run good businesses, and asked them to respond. We were quite fortunate to get 27 responses to that, and we've got what's nearly a book in itself with their knowledge and experience captured in their responses to those 5 questions. The wisdom that it's captured with the responses that we're fortunate to get, the people that responded gave quite frank and honest insights into the lessons they've learned over time and what they've gained from management. And every time I read it, I get an injection of enthusiasm. Like it's a great resource for the industry, and it's almost a book within itself. It underpins everything. The grazing and management side of it is the foundation. I used to think that the herd or the business were the foundation, but over time I'm coming to realise that how the natural resource base is managed has such a big impact on business performance in terms of the variability year to year and also the performance over time. So we went out to some people who have got some good knowledge in this area, some good practical experience, not just of from a research and scientific point of view, but they get their boots dirty by spending a lot of time in the paddock with producers dealing with these issues. And we just thought it was important to complement the other information we've got in the report to have this resource on how to manage the natural resource base for the north and the south. One where financial, environmental and intellectual capital flourish. And that is occurring across a lot of the industry at the moment, and we look at that within the report in terms of what the top performers are doing. But we think it's important that a greater proportion of the industry achieves that vision, because as the largest land manager of any industry in Australia, it's important that we are sustainable. Well, there was a lot of data analysis and research in there where we used our benchmarking process to generate a lot of the data that was in there. We also had to go and research other information sources such as land values and beef prices, terms of trade, total factor productivity, and bring them together and attempt to put them together in one place and give them context so that producers could understand them and how they fit in together. We also had to go out to the guest authors and brief them and engage them to write the chapters, which involved a fair lead time, and also the pastoral panel going out to the people we identified for that, explaining the process, asking the questions and compiling them. So there was a fair lead time in putting all of that information together for this report. There's a lot of information that we generated that we haven't put in the report just to try and keep it as concise as we can. So there's a lot of information on the financial and production performance of the industry, north and south, by herd size, by market, and by region. There's also some decision support tools that are related to content in the report that people can use and put their own information into. There's also a lot of maps that also aren't included in the report that show some regional differences which are insightful into the performance of the industry and the differences between regions. To me, intellectual capital is what good producers and also advisors and other industry stakeholders have learnt from their experiences, their peers and their predecessors about profitable pastoral production. There's a lot of knowledge out there, and the fortunate part of the work we do day to day and in this report is capturing that knowledge and learning from the people that are doing it really well. So that's what we think intellectual capital is, and in some ways that's what we've tried to capture a sample of within the pastoral panel, that experience of people, the lessons they've learned the hard way over time. We think that there's a gap in the industry for independent quality analysis of industry performance that is prepared just for the people that buy it. We're not trying to sell anything in this report other than the report itself. By doing it independently, we're able to call things as we see it and look at issues in a way that may not be palatable to some funding bodies potentially. In that, we also think it's important that we do get independent external reviews to help make sure that what we're saying is defendable and sound. So we've gone out to a respected industry scientist and sought his critique of what we've prepared, as well as a couple of leading producers, and asked them to have a look at it for us. An independent analysis and assessment of the performance of the Australian beef industry at the family business level. They'll get an understanding of what determines performance and what doesn't, and they'll get an understanding of what goes on in the heads of top performing producers and what that intellectual capital of theirs is over time. They'll also get a resource from industry specialists on how best to manage the natural resource base, as well as interpretation and analysis around macro industry factors such as land prices, beef prices, terms of trade, and total factor productivity.